We've identified the flexibility to very specifically tailor our conversion process so that it maximizes the SAF component of all of the energy outputs. We make all of these renewable energy outputs: hydrogen, nat gas, LPG, SAF, diesel, but we can tailor that. We've got the ability to tailor to up to 90% of all of those feedstocks coming right back out as SAF.
Welcome to Sustainability in the Air, the world's first podcast dedicated to sustainable aviation. I'm your host, Shashank Nigam, the CEO of Simplifying. On this show, I speak with aviation leaders, innovators, and policymakers driving real action, separating the signal from the noise to spotlight what's truly moving the industry forward. The same focus that is at the heart of our new book, Sustainability in the Air, Volume 2. In it, Dirk Singer and I take stock of how far the industry has come and how far we still need to go. With the global carbon budget potentially running out by 2032, the clock is ticking. But the most promising solutions today aren't just environmentally sound, they are economically superior as well, from SAF and contrail mitigation to direct air capture. The book offers a practical roadmap for aviation's journey to net zero. Get your copy today. Link in the show notes. My guest today is Bruce Fleming, the CEO of Montana Renewables, currently the largest producer of sustainable aviation fuel in the US. Rather than building a new SAF plant from scratch, Montana Renewables converted part of an existing crude oil refinery in Great Falls, Montana, to process feedstock like used cooking oil and agricultural waste into SAF, renewable used diesel, and renewable hydrogen. In this episode, we dive into why retrofitting refineries may be the fastest path to scale, how feedstock agnostic production changes the economics of SAF, and what policy stability really means for unlocking private investment in clean fuels. Bruce, it's fantastic to be finally speaking with you on the podcast. How did Montana Renewables become the largest provider of SAF in the US? We can spend the next 40 minutes while you answer this question.
Yeah, we can, but that's kind of the essence of our whole hour today. And if you zoom up a second and think about the energy transition, energy is always transitioning. It's always been transitioning. Next summer, I'll have been in the energy industry 50 years. I've seen a lot of this transition personally. Renewables have always been a small part of that, marginal part. And if geothermal energy comes to mind. There are things that have been in the world a long, long time. So they kind of come back around again, become topical, become interesting. And Montana Renewables was an intentional business development initiative by Calumet. The parent company is a serial entrepreneur, and we study a lot of things, and then we attempt the ones that seem to make sense. And it made a lot of sense in Montana to take a portion of a conventional crude oil refinery, part of it, and put renewable feedstocks into that. It took a lot of rearranging of the chemical engineering toys, as I call them, but the opportunity was basically a really low capital cost entry compared to a new build. And off of that platform, and with some of the unique advantages that we have there, which I'm sure you're going to come to, we are one of the very few Department of Energy loan guarantees. They diligenced us for years, decided we were meritorious, and we secured our capital structure that way. So a lot of things have gone well, and that's off of the strength of a very, very solid underlying value proposition.
You mentioned co-processing, or you hinted towards that. I want to just dive a little into that because there is an existing crude refinery in Great Falls, which you've converted into a SAF facility rather than building from scratch. Tell us a little about what went into that decision and why that's been so critical?
So, what we have now, just to begin with the end in mind, is there are two businesses. They're entirely separate and distinct. One is a small crude oil refinery, conventional one, and one is the renewables lineup. So, if you think two trains, um, it's under common site operations. We've got one workforce, one standard for safety, inspection, maintenance, metallurgy, all of the things you have to do to be a prudent operator. These are skills that our industry has built up over a century. The fact that it's renewable feedstock is kind of a detail. It's a super important detail, but otherwise, we're engaged in operational activities every day that we're pretty familiar with. Um, so when you think about it that way, what we're proud of is we pivoted the site without any reduction in total transportation fuels output. The total transportation fuels output is what it was before, and nobody else can say that. No, and I'll use a couple of my peers to make a point, and this is all public information. I'm proud of what they've both done, but Marathon and Phillips 66 in the Bay Area both took a refinery in the in the zip code of 175,000 barrels per day each. Those were deep conversion refineries. Their transportation fuel yield was almost 175,000 barrels a day. Very, very efficient. They're now renewable. You lose three-quarters of the transportation fuel yield if you switch the whole thing to renewable. So if somebody said, somebody that didn't understand the industry better said, oh, let's just make all the refineries in the country go to renewable, that's great. You just lost three-quarters of the fuel supply. That's a horrible disaster, right? So you can't do that. So the energy transition occurs over a period of time so that fuel supply is maintained in the market. Customers care a great deal about available supplies. They want them to be reliable. They want them to be clean. They want them to be cost effective. And so you transition carefully. And we did something very, very unique here in order not to reduce fuel availability in the middle of Montana.
This is fascinating. Again, a detail I did not appreciate until I heard you speak around, having a single facility with just two products. So the renewables part becomes a detail. You're planning, I believe, to scale from about 30 million gallons to 300 million gallons annual capacity over the next few years. That's 10x growth. How are you going to get there? Let's dive a little deeper into, what's the plan and how you're planning to get there.
Yeah, so that's a great question. And it sounds dramatic when you say it that way. And we do say it that way. But I think it'll be helpful for people listening to appreciate there's two things happening. First thing, what's our total throughput of renewable feedstocks? Second thing, what's our product mix that we can manufacture from those feedstocks? So today, our existing permit is in the zip code of 250 million gallons per year of feedstock. We're only pushing the total throughput up a little bit. It's going to go up to 300-ish. So if you think about total throughput, we're going up whatever that math is, a modest amount of plus 20% or so on throughput. What we're really doing is taking advantage of a couple of tactical constraint removal opportunities. Now that we've really learned our unit, we formed this business 5 years ago. We've been operating for 4 years. We've really learned our way around it, and we found those tactical debottlenecking opportunities that are going to give us a huge amount of flexibility on the product mix. So, what do I mean by product mix? We manufacture, coming out of the unit, we make renewable hydrogen, we make renewable natural gas, we make renewable LPG, renewable jet, renewable diesel. Uh, that is flexible within some bounds, but right now fairly constrained. So the most economic SAF yield that we can spit out is probably somewhere in the zip code of 50 million gallons today. Um, we're going to be able to push that economic SAF yield way, way up by our constraint removal projects. So that's the mix, that's the percentages of things. So with a great deal of flexibility, we are even better able to follow market volatility or dynamic trends, short term and long term.
This is very interesting. Why are you actually focusing on the renewables across all these categories? What is the motivation to begin with? I know earlier there was policy support. Now I'm not sure if that policy support remains.
So there's so you've kind of got a two-part question there, and I like the way you asked that. So let's let's kind of toggle back and forth. What do we make, and what is the policy support to make it? So, uh, point one, the renewable fuels cost more than the fossil equivalent that they are replacing. True without exception across the board. So when consumers say we have a preference, we'd like this, then that has to be backed up by consumers paying for something that's more expensive than the previous alternative. That's the energy transition. And again, energy's always been transitioning. Um, it's always going to cleaner. It's always going to more efficient. It's always going to more reliable. And so long term stewardship of a carbon cycle is part of this. But there's also stewardship of other emissions hiding inside of here. And I'm going to use SAF for a moment, and then I'm going to come back to your point. So the more that the technical folks study high altitude emissions from high temperature jet turbines, the more fascinating that gets. What is it worth to the environment to stop injecting particulates, sulfur compounds, nitrogen compounds at 40,000 feet? What is a contrail and what does that do? This is just a fascinating journey of discovery in SAF space, and it is continuing. So we are particularly interested in SAF. We're introducing our site modifications to give us a lot of flexibility to make a lot more SAF because we think that is really the hard to abate emissions. And I don't mean only carbon. People say environment or they say energy transition, and pretty quickly they're only talking about CO2, and that's far, far too narrow. You have to talk about all of this. There's some fascinating research on contrails. There's some fascinating research on high altitude sulfur particles across the North Pacific. I direct anybody that's interested to pick up those threads. So then you take that on board and you say, right, we are probably at Calumet, at Montana Renewables, we're probably helping pioneer a lot of this because we were a first mover. So as you noted, in 2024, we were the largest producer of SAF in the Western Hemisphere. That sounds really dramatic. But since you and I are looking at each other on a video link, I'm going to hold up my fingernail and say, but the largest producer in the Western Hemisphere made all of the fingernails worth of difference in the global world of jet fuel consumption, right? So where is this headed long term? And the answer is nobody knows. We're in a period of experimentation. We are discovering what the levers are for climate stewardship writ large, not CO2 stewardship, climate stewardship. We're discovering what the levers are. We're going to follow the science. We're going to be better. We're going to be smarter. And we're going to be faster. And we're going to be more efficient. So if I sum that all up and say, look, I just showed the industry how to put renewables into the refinery slate without losing transportation fuel reduction. That is huge on the long term cost of fuels across a large ecosystem. That is huge. We think there's something to be cloned there by others. We elected to do this in a way that produces renewable hydrogen. Everybody else, like us, the other half of producers are generally, I'm not going to use the color palette, but they're generally have fossil inputs. It's not necessary.
It's blue, gray, pink, something.
Yeah, all of that. Department of Energy would prefer that we don't use the color wheel, and we talk about what is the intensity of manufacturing the hydrogen in terms of energy inputs, and what is the life cycle in terms of CO2 implications or CI.
The total carbon intensity score.
Yeah, so we've done all of that. So look, we're pioneering this because we're a small company and we're nimble. And the reason that worked for us, so we've reported earnings for 2025 through 3 quarters. We haven't closed our books yet for the full year, so I don't want to get into that presently, not public information. But I can tell you through 3 quarters, we were cash flow positive here. I don't think there's anybody else that can say that. And so the things that I'm flagging as unique actually show up on the bottom line where investors pay the most attention. And, we're pretty proud of that. Now, it's a difficult external market condition. This is where I'm going to link your other half of the question a minute ago back in. Regulators are trying to find a way forward. There's policy support. It's broad policy support. It's all over the place, but it's fragmentary. So there's a piece of policy support that is maybe designed to help the farm sector. That's a producer's tax credit, previously known as a blender's tax credit. The belief is that flows back to the agricultural sector or the ranch sector where we derive our waste and our renewable feedstocks. There are things like RINs from the US EPA, analogous products in other countries like the Canadian Clean Fuel Regulation. States and provinces are experimenting across a wide front. So you got all of this going for you, but not reliably, not completely joined up. And so the second that a regulator somewhere in the world realizes, okay, we've been trying to do this for a while, but we're still not getting what we want, we're going to go back and re-regulate. We're going to change this. The topical example is the EU went live a year ago on a mandatory SAF volume. And after a long period of experimentation, they finally just said, heck with it. You guys have to use this. You figure it out. Those are dramatic changes in an industry which is experimenting and forming. And I'm gonna use the phrase unintended consequences, and I'm going to turn that coin over and say first, do no harm. So, the regulatory landscape is broadly supportive, but not stable. And so, if a long-term investor said, "I'm willing to put money to work in a regulated space, I believe in the energy transition, I like where this is going, I see all of this fascinating science where we get smarter and smarter, and the private sector will be better and better at bringing the targeted solutions that we need. That's all great. Am I going to get my money back?" And then they watch how dynamic the regulators have been, and they back away. There is effectively zero private capital available at this time.
So that really helps that you are cash flow positive because then you're not trying to raise money to begin with.
Yeah. So when the investors are trying to put money to work and they say, we've studied this, we see a lot of good business pitches, somebody wants to build a plant that'll do X, that'll do Y, but that's a grassroots plant. That's 100 cents on the dollar new concrete and steel. Or you could buy into something that's existing, which is effectively de-risked and which has at least proved its survivability in this somewhat chaotic, somewhat dynamic, somewhat evolutionary regulatory climate. That feels a little bit safer to investors. Look, I started my career, my very first job as a degreed engineer. I was working for Mobile Research and Development Corporation, and I was supporting on the R&D side what was commercialized as an alcohol to fuels plant. It was built at scale in New Zealand. None of this is new. It all comes back around. It always does. These are proven technologies. We're agnostic. I'm an engineer. You tell me which molecules to convert to which other molecules, I will do it, but I will also tell you this is what it is going to cost. And in the long run, people care about that. So we can't just say, that's really cool, let's build lots of that, and pick something that costs 10 times as much as a renewable alternative that is also available. So used refineries are going to convert to HEFA platforms, period, full stop. Because the hardware is suitable, it's a drop-in compatible fuel. I don't have to replicate an entire enormous fueling distribution infrastructure around the world. So that's the proven tech. That's what all of the plants are. Yes, we have a couple of experiments. Yes, they will work technically. No, they won't scale commercial. Now, what should the investors do? That's a lot to sort out if you're an investor and you have to parse through all of that. Now, having set up the challenge, here's a simple answer. I like the word locavore. You ever go to a restaurant and the restaurant says, we've gathered all of our ingredients within 50 miles of this restaurant? We got the potatoes over here. We got the lamb over here. We grew the herbs in our own garden out back, um, and they're trying to make a point. I like the point. I direct everyone to go have a look at the greater Minneapolis St. Paul SAF hub. If you solve these things locally, you will automatically solve them in a way that makes sense to those regulators in that geography for that constituency who vote for those officials. It will make sense. It will also be different. Geothermal's been around a long, long time. There's still only half a dozen material commercial deployments because they made sense locally and they work and they can sustain. We are just next. We have a commercial SAF deployment. It makes sense locally. It works financially. It can sustain. It doesn't mean it should be cloned with a one size fits all everywhere in the world. But I do think HEFA is the proven winner economically. I do think it offers the most easily replicated transition, taking the maximum advantage of existing fueling infrastructure. And now we need just one more little thing. For Pete's sake, I almost used a different word.
And that's all right.
Let's not have micromanaging that says I have to be able to audit and prove that that drop of SAF went all the way from the field into that wing of that flight. Are you kidding me? Because you introduced one, two, three very inefficient transportation movements that are totally unnecessary if instead you had any equivalent of a book and claim system. You want SAF faster? Set up a global book and claim.
Oh yes, absolutely, and we're going to come to book and claim shortly as well. But there's so much to dive and double click on what you have just told me about. Let's talk a little about your feedstock. Currently, you're using the HEFA pathway, um, but you spoke about how in different states you have to talk about alcohol to jet or the kind of source that they're using. What is the pathway you're using? What are the future potential pathways that are under evaluation?
Yeah, great question. And I'll give you some shorter answers now that we've set up the enormous universe of the
Sure.
energy transition. Let's get practical. So we don't care what feedstock we put into the machine. All of these are essentially interchangeable to an operator like us. They all have to be cleaned. We have treatment technology that's important. Um, we're running the catalytic process. It's a high tech catalyst. It's sensitive. We're very, very careful here, but I can run used cooking oil. I can run emerging crops like camelina, which don't compete for anything. I can run, classical vegetable crops. I can run waste products from anybody's operation. And we simply choose those economically. If a customer came in and said, I want to, buy some renewable transportation fuel from you, but I want to make sure you made it from exactly this thing, no problem. That's fine. It goes to the commercial price. You want me to use the magic elixir, it costs twice as much, fine. But if you want me to do that, this is the price of that fuel made that way. So all of that is simply optimization as any refiner anywhere in the world would recognize it. It's not a big deal. These are all interchangeable. And so the note that says let's not micromanage the feed supply too early in the
Okay.
evolution of a new industry. And we're doing that. The global failure right now is a whole bunch of different jurisdictions are writing different constraints on feedstock. And all that's going to do, that's a balloon game. I don't want you to use this feedstock in my area, so I'm going to push down that end of the balloon. No problem. The commercial guys will promptly rearrange all the feedstocks in the world because guess what? All of the demand is met by all of the supply. The more you rearrange that, the more expensive you make it, the more inefficient you make it. And it's kind of pointless.
You are you suggesting that your technology is feedstock agnostic?
We are agnostic. We don't care. And I want to make an important point here. The fact that all of these discussion points around feedstock and competition and how does it play out are on the table is a great thing because that's people thinking at a higher level. It's people thinking about if I make this change, how is that going to ripple through the system? Are there unintended consequences or effects? It's a great discussion. But here's a real simple thing to keep in mind. acreage under cultivation to feed people. Acreage under cultivation for food has been going down for a century in North America. Food production is becoming efficient faster than food demand is going up. There is more and more fallow land. We are not worried about competing for food. There's
And
plenty of
that's
land available. If you are worried about competing for food, plant a cover crop like camelina. As far as we know, we are the only people in the world to have made SAF out of camelina. It's an emerging future crop that's not food, doesn't compete for anything, offers other benefits to farmers, has a very low CI, carbon intensity. It's great. So the second you set up a rule set, the entire infrastructure here, meaning the people that grow things, the people that transport those things, the people that convert those things to other forms of energy like us, we're all going to react and make that efficient and re-optimize it. But you can't change the rules every second Tuesday. The speed of this re-optimization is a decade. If you don't have rule stability that is a decade long, you won't have any investment beyond experimental seed capital.
fair enough.
Which leaves investors just to land the point. So thank you. I was waiting for that to resonate. Which leaves investors saying, "Look, that's too much to sort out." So there's only two kinds of investors out there right now: the very, very early venture capital that want to spread all kinds of bets around, and let's just see which ones pay off a decade from now. There's a role for that certainly, but if you want to scale an energy transition, the only platform you can really come into is anybody's HEFA plant. And there's only one or two of those that are investable. The others are captive inside of mega corporations.
Interesting. Where does this place e-fuels or power to liquid SAF?
Yeah, boutique, niche applications, right? So if I have access to, I'm going to be dramatic here, free electricity. If I have free electricity, like I said earlier, I'm the engineer. I'll convert any molecule to any other molecule, and I really don't care. We're here to follow the rules. Um, and in the Pacific Northwest where we are, we're very, very rich in hydro. So there's the power side. Um, these are all interconvertible. I can convert power to liquids. I can convert stranded natural gas to liquids. I can convert anything to anything else. Now, if you get less energy out afterwards, you're obviously doing something preposterously counterproductive. So you cannot broadly convert all of the power to all of the liquids. Here's why. Because the underlying price of energy is going to go through the roof when that plays all the way through into a higher price for metal, a higher price for mining activity, a higher price for labor. So there will be boutique applications for everything you can think of. That's the locavore model. I'm very, very bullish on room for all of these technologies, room for all of these innovations, room for all of this development, if we let the local experimentation tell us where it makes sense and where it doesn't. The second you come in with a one size fits all, convert everything by 2050, you're going to fail globally.
So I'm very curious then on your thoughts around the European mandates, which require RFNBO certified, like fuel of no biological origin, as opposed to a lot of the stuff we've been talking about. And they are encouraging tremendously e-fuels, which they hope will become mainstream. Are, are their beliefs and policies misplaced?
I think that's a very appropriate challenge. And what I'll tell you is that when the ecosystem is this large and complex, you've necessarily assembled a team of people with specialized expertise in many, many, many of the different elements here. And so the art is harnessing all of that. And so the regulators have a large challenge because they're in the role of trying to harness a large, complex problem. What I've learned in my career about large, complex models is they don't ever work. It's your best current understanding, but you're going to wind up revising it. And so I would recharacterize the question. The regulators absolutely have a role to play in forcing technology forward. If you don't force it forward, you're not going to get the breakthroughs or the discoveries or the innovations. So I'm super excited about that side of the coin as I've signaled. If you also prescribe the outcome, you made the classic mistake of picking a winner. So the idea that you will have fuels of no biological origin is preposterous on the face of it.
Why do I feel I'll need to start this episode with this statement? just to
Go ahead.
just because.
Yeah, you're welcome to. What you've done. So think about how this works. You're attempting to say, I want to take a fossil carbon cycle that is, hundreds of thousands or millions of years. That's the carbon cycle we have now. The triglycerides, fancy word. I'm assuming your audience is going to be generally familiar, but that's our feedstock. That shows up everywhere in plants and animals. It gets into the algae, it settles to the bottom of the ocean, disappears under the ground, and becomes a future oil and gas deposit. It's a carbon cycle, but it's a very long, slow one. We can do that a lot faster. So when we say net zero, Montana Renewables is very, very close to net zero because we're turning that cycle this year on these crops that were grown, sucked the CO2 out of the air, put it into the triglycerides, came over to us, and we converted it to fuels. So now I've got a carbon cycle that's like a year or a crop cycle instead of millennia of geologic time. That's sufficient. But if somebody shows up and says, yeah, but it's a crop, I don't want you to do it that way, you have to use something else. Well, the only other form of energy available is solar incoming radiation. And I'm sorry, it's not directly convertible without going through a biological system somewhere. I'm either going to launder the solar radiation through a plant or an animal or a solar panel or through climate disturbances like
Right.
tidal forces. But where do you think tides and waves come from? From weather, which, wait for it, came from incoming solar radiation. So you got all of this enormous, complex, poorly understood, um, and very, very difficult to forecast. So let's not be too proud of our current understanding. Let's be a little bit humble there and say the role for experimentation, hypothesis, testing of hypothesis, confirmation of theory, redirection of preferred outcome, that's going to be with us for a long, long time. What do we really need? Much more efficient electrical infrastructure. The liquid transportation fuel infrastructure is not the problem. The electrical infrastructure is the problem. Focus there. Battery tech, storage tech, peak load. All of this is going to be fascinating. But why do you have to jump the shark and connect the electrical grid to the nat gas grid to the liquid transportation fuels grid? Why is it necessary for those to be interchangeable this early in the transition?
Fair enough. Fair enough. I have one question on your earlier point that you made, Bruce, which was 10x capacity from 30 million to 300 million that you're looking to grow. Will that be just one plant? Will that be many plants? Where will these plants be? Who will have access to them?
That's only yeah, that's a great question. That's only at Montana Renewables. So
Hmm.
let's take that three directions. We have the flexibility. We've identified the flexibility to very specifically tailor our conversion process so that it maximizes the SAF component of all of the energy outputs. Remember, we make all of these renewable energy outputs: hydrogen, nat gas, LPG, SAF, diesel. But we can tailor that, and we happen to be using Topso Catalyst. They're a very good tech supplier. They're not the only one, but we've got the ability, we think, to tailor to up to 90% of all of those feedstocks coming right back out as SAF. That's huge. We're going to pioneer that, and we're going to show that anybody can do that. Now, you've got an entire installed global HEFA industry, which could fuel airlines. Here's a one-liner for you. A battery-powered long-haul heavy-duty aircraft will cross the Pacific Never.
Ouch.
You can't get enough energy density onto the aircraft to lift the weight. It's going to remain liquid fueled. And as a passenger, I very much appreciate that because there's nowhere to stop if you ran out of electrical power partway across the northern Pacific Ocean. So that's going to stay on liquid. That's called hard to decarbonize. I'm going to say it differently. It's very hard to take an efficient, high density energy source and say, nah, it's okay if we fly that plane across on about 17 acres of solar panels. Yeah, it's okay. It was done across the English Channel a long time ago. I direct you to Google the Gossamer Goose, if memory serves, but it doesn't scale, people. So we need the liquid fuels. We're now showing that we can pivot all of that to SAF, and you can solve the ground transportation problem with the power to liquids. You cannot solve the air
Right.
problem with power to liquids. So you see how all of these pieces, all of these jigsaw pieces fit together. That is the regulator's problem. They're trying to harness all of this. They're hearing a lot of things. Some of those things conflict. You've got some promoters and developers that would, maybe try a little too hard to raise funding, make a little bit too bold a claim, um, and that's a lot of challenge to place on a regulator. I don't envy them the size of the problem that they have undertaken. I simply caution them you cannot over constrain an industry that is in an experimental phase with a bunch of micromanaging on what feedstocks are allowed for which targeted applications. You can't do it. All you've done is freeze the growth.
Fair enough. Who's buying your product today? Who are your partners and your customers?
So our current state is we made a conscious decision to partner with a global aviation fueling specialist, that is Shell Aviation. They take all of the SAF. They take it wherever it wants to go because they have the scope and scale to be able to do that. And we didn't. Now, going forward, when the SAF output goes way up, we are beginning to experiment with direct placement to end users, and so we've got a couple of announcements out. We're going to have a larger, more comprehensive discussion of that shortly. But we're experimenting with buyers who want Scope 1 and 3 emissions certificates. We're experimenting with buyers that want a blended 50-50 blend, SPK, the pure quill, plus fossil. Um, they want that made from certain feedstocks. They don't care about the feedstocks. They want it, tailored to this kind of an end use. And sometimes that's a parcel delivery. Sometimes that's a private aviation. We've got, we're harnessing experimentation by end users. So we're going to have a SAF book of business that is much more diverse and much larger. And that's just us encouraging experimentation and conversations among industry players.
That's fascinating. Instead of trying to sell individual offtake to individual airlines, you've just partnered with Shell and they take care with their big aviation client footprint.
Yeah, going backwards, that's correct. Going forwards, I'll tell you one other thing I believe.
Mhm.
So the I see an awful lot of um, the conversational space in this energy transition and specific to SAF. Dominated. The conversation is dominated by passenger airlines and future projects that have to be built and built from the ground up, meaning that's the most expensive capital path forward. So that's an important conversation for a far future state where we've made significant inroads into percentage replacement of fossil jet. That's not the current state, though. That's not important today. What's important today is fueling general aviation. That means the small planes. It is anywhere from 4 to 10 times as much CO2 emissions per passenger mile for the little planes. And so the way forward is short haul, small plane. That's general aviation, meaning the private fleet, and it's some of the regional hub and spoke activity by the majors. That's where the emphasis needs to be placed. That's where the conversation should be. And so we're seeing a lot of adoption by FBOs and by secondary airports. I would draw everybody's attention to if you want to make a difference by fueling small, not large flights.
This is very fascinating because if you go to small FBOs, then business aviation opens up as well. And I'm wondering if you have any thoughts around business aviation and not just commercial aviation and their march towards decarbonization and what role they can play.
Yeah, I'll give you a couple thoughts. And the people that want to and can afford to, which is two things, make a difference. Um, Go to, for example, Signature Aviation. I'm not here to promote anybody, but Signature Aviation is a wide distributor, a service provider of fuels at FBO, fixed base operations, meaning the private fleet. And they post, in many of the locations, they post both prices. You want to be fueled fossil or you want to be fueled renewable jet. The prices are not that far apart. So you've got this canard, you've got this urban myth that, oh my God, renewable jet costs, 5 times fossil, costs 10 times fossil. Not true. Not true into wing. It's a false comparison and it's way outdated. What do aviation participants need when they buy fuel? If they are a commercial carrier, they are competing on price. They need a level playing field. The airline industry, just in my career, operated just fine when crude oil was $10 a barrel in the 80s. And they operated just fine when crude oil went north of $100 a barrel several times. They need a level playing field. That is accomplished by something like the European model. It says you all have to use the same amount of this fuel. That's going to play through to you all have to pay the same amount of money at the Copenhagen airport, at the Munich airport, because the fueling consortium on the airport is putting in the amount of fossil and making the blended fuel available at the same price to everybody. That
Wow.
actually works. The problem is the voluntary adoption, where somebody volunteers to pay more than the other guy because they're going to adopt a little bit more renewable than the other guy. I very much encourage everyone to have that conversation in the general aviation space and not in the long haul, 757, 787,
Right, right.
E380 space.
Volumes are different as well.
Conversation.
Mm-hmm.
Short.
I hear you. Um, it's interesting that you are one of the largest producers of SAF today in the the largest in the Western Hemisphere. Yet you mentioned book and claim earlier. What is the role book and claim can play in scaling SAF?
Yeah, it's super important. So I'm gonna have to stop saying we're the largest probably when everybody reports for 2025 because there are two very capable, very credible entrants that have since come into this space. Phillips 66, which can produce SAF at Rodeo, California, and Diamond Green Diesel, which can produce SAF at Port Arthur, Texas. These are long-standing, incredible players, and we'll see how much they sold, and we'll see whether I have to pass on the number one prize to one of those two guys. Um, but that leaves three producers at scale in North America. They're all serving a voluntary market, and nobody knows how deep the voluntary market is. It's continuing to form. We're all going to find solutions to encourage that development. We're going to help those customers obtain the supplies they need for their corporate strategies and purposes. And we will automatically do that in the most efficient way, meaning everybody cares about the price. And we're all going to work together to make the price lower. So the role of book and claim is, do I physically have to transport a truck of jet fuel to, I don't know, the Reno airport from Great Falls, Montana? Or can I have that truck go to the Great Falls airport, strip off the scope emission certificate, and hand it to the person at Reno that wanted to reduce emissions? That's book and claim. The difference is $1 a gallon in the finished fuel product if I don't have to transport things all over the country in trucks and rail cars, which is not efficient, and I can transport by pipeline, which is efficient. $1 a gallon is a lot, and that's how inefficient the transportation is at the moment. Book and claim will fix that inefficiency very, very quickly.
When we look forward now to 2035, 2040, how do you see the SAF industry evolving, and what role do you believe you'll be playing at that time, 10 years from now?
Yeah, so I think the important role that we're playing now is we're pretty nimble. We were very fortunate with the location of our site. We were very fortunate with the physical attributes, the chemical engineering attributes of our specific hardware. And that's a situation that's different for every single plant that might come into this space. No two refineries are alike in the crude oil space. No two future HEFA plants are going to be alike in this space. We're simply showing people what's possible. The ideas that make sense will be picked up in other localities. I think that's a very, very important contribution in the long run. 2050, I think you've got a lot of very local, very bespoke solutions around the world in 2050. If we will stop trying to make a one tight size fits all global solution, if we will stop prescribing the official technology that is allowed, if we will stop over constraining how the manufacturer gathers the energy inputs. Don't tell me how to do that. Tell me what you want, and I will do it in an effective way. Then you're going to be super proud when we write this history a couple of decades from now of how we got through the transition and where we wound up. Going to be super proud of all of that. But you have to allow the people who actually understand how these things work, which is the operators. You have to allow them to have a voice in regulation.
Right. Talking about regulation, if there's one thing you could change tomorrow about regulation, policy, markets, or even technology that would actually accelerate SAF adoption globally, what would it be?
Listen to the commercial operators.
Mm-hmm. But by that, do you mean our airlines?
No, I mean everybody. Right? So play it out. We have to gather energy. Right now, I'm gathering it in the form of things that began in acreage. They were a crop, or they were a ranched product, or they were a cooking oil. But eventually, sunlight fell on hectares and turned into energy, which I can purchase as a feedstock, which I can convert onward, and my customer can use to power transportation. Right. So these are the operators. They're all commercial. They're all doing things, and apparently, nobody cares about what we think, and they're blithely writing regulations and constraints and instructions anyway. I have no idea where those central planning folks are getting their inputs, but I know they're not getting it from us.
Fair enough. This has been a very, very fascinating interview, Bruce. The final part of this interview is what we call the rapid fire round, in which you can give me a one-word answer or a very, very short phrase in which we get to know you a bit more personally. So, Bruce, simple things like, what's your favorite airline?
I lived in Hong Kong for 10 years, and I really like Cathay Pacific.
Oh, that's a fantastic choice. Favorite airport?
That would have been Chep Lap Kak at the time I left.
In Hong Kong as well?
Today I like secondary airports because they're small and user-friendly, and people are a lot less stressed.
Yes, including the TSA and the security stuff.
Everybody.
They're generally smiling.
Everybody. Yep. I'm a happy traveler. Those are frontline people at those airports, and it's a better day for everybody if we can smile at each other.
Yeah. Favorite city?
I don't have one. I've absolutely loved everywhere I have lived, everywhere I have visited. If I have not been to your city, invite me, and I'll go there just to see it.
Sounds good. I'll see you soon in London then. That's where I am right now.
Yeah, many times. And I go there for Indian food, to be clear.
Then the next time you're here, I'll take you to an Indian place you have definitely not been to. And it's pretty good.
Accepted.
Favorite movie?
I'm going to go with The Lord of the Rings.
Great choice. Okay. Favorite book?
Ender's Game, Orson Scott Card. and what the
Good.
movie and the book have in common is one of them that the Lord of the Rings is kind of an origin story. Ender's Game is a projection of how that's going to play out. You've got a really long historical arc, but it's bookended there.
Nice. What do you do in your free time?
I like. I'm a recovering engineer. I've risen past being able to do that daily, but I still like maintaining my car and my house. My personal vehicle is a 2003 Acura coupe, and I do all of the work on that myself because I still can.
Wow, I love it. I love it that you're still, tinkering with it yourself. What is something you'd like to learn, Bruce?
I'm trying to learn how to communicate effectively to everybody else in this energy transition space. The more we talk to each other, the sooner you walk away with a new thought that you didn't have. So it's less a specific learning and more that the process of engagement raises everybody's game.
Right. Fair enough. And finally, what's the best advice you've received?
Oh, that's easy. My first boss said, the most effective people are the ones who deal with the world the way it actually is,
Love it.
not the way you want it to be.
And I think those are the most, those are also the happiest, I think.
Or the best adjusted, take your choice. But you have, so energy transition is a change agency problem. We're all trying to change things, and of course that attracts, I didn't want it to be changed, thank you, or I don't agree with your change, I want this other change. So once you're managing change agency, you can still do it off of the world the way it is. And I kind of like what's going on now. I really do. It's large, it's complicated, it involves lots of people, it's a global undertaking. We're bootstrapping this, and we can still go out and actually do things right now today in Montana with our asset in order to prove what's possible.
Amazing. Well, Bruce,
That'll be picked up by us.
congratulations on showing us the art of the possible. I love how you have scaled. I love the clarity in thought in scaling for the future. And thank you for sharing your insights with the audience here.
Thank you for the platform. I love these conversations. If anybody gets anything out of that, then you've done a good job.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Sustainability in the Air. Aviation is one of the hardest to decarbonize industries, yet there are multiple paths to get to net zero. Awareness is key to a green future. So please give us your support to help our sustainable aviation insights reach a wider audience. You can do this by sharing this episode on your network, on LinkedIn, Twitter, or even WhatsApp. Or perhaps you might consider leaving a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to this episode. You can start a conversation with us by writing to us at podcast@simplifying, that's simply with an i.com. And for more content on sustainable aviation, please visit our website green.simplifying.com and join the movement. Sustainability in the Air is an original podcast by Simplifying. The show is produced by Juraj Toth in Slovakia. Dirk Singer is our Director of Sustainability, who leads research for each interviewee out of Greenwich, UK. Shubhadeep Pal is our Supervising Editor based out of Mumbai and Singapore. The articles are written by Ayushi Badola in Dehradun in India and Mira Hull in Montreal, Quebec. Creative design is led by Ligia Esteve in Montreal. Baiba Drimen is the project director for the show based out of Valencia, Spain. Special thanks to Wendy Sim in Singapore. And I'm Shashank Nigam, the CEO of Simplifying and your host. Please feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn.